Who follows Governor Jerry Brown as he completes his historic second 8-year stint as California governor will be decided this November. In addition, legislative seats up for grabs could alter the look of the California legislature as well as California's congressional delegation. We'll discuss the upcoming November races with Laurel Rosenhall of CALmatters and John Myers of the LA Times.
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world. From the California Channel at the State Capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. Well, we're going to have a new governor, a new state legislature, potentially a new Congress after the November elections. How consequential will all of that be? We've got two important people to kind of guide us through this. John Myers, who's the Sacramento Bureau Chief for the LA Times, and Laurel Rosenhall with CALmatters. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, John, President Trump seems to be looming large over everything. What effect is he going to have on Californian voters in November?
It really is the question, isn't it? Trying to figure out the Trump effect for better or for worse. The one number that I keep looking at is what is the president's job approval rating in California? When you look at one of the recent polls from the Public Policy Institute, it was about 37% of likely voters supported the job he's doing. I kind of consider that the base number, right, for a lot of things. Base number for John Cox, who's running for governor. Base number for Republican candidates in battleground districts. Base number for the gas tax, which you would think there'd be some kind of linkage between people who would be like-minded. I don't know, but that's a low number. And if you see anybody else hovering near that number, it shows you they're not appealing to someone else. You've got to appeal to more than the Trump electorate in California, I think, in most cases.
I'm going to try to argue the contrary. Non-factor or factor?
Oh, definitely a factor. Okay. I mean, I looked at the same poll, and the number I took away was that half of likely voters think this race is more important than any other recent midterm election, and so you've got a very energized, especially on the Democratic side, very energized electorate who is fired up and believes this election is really, really important.
And he's approaching almost 60% negatives in terms of his overall performance, President Trump, in California. So that's probably another issue. Well, let me ask you this. So we've got the Kavanaugh Supreme Court nomination. We've got the Me Too movement. What impact are those things you think are going to have on California congressional races?
I think that this was already kind of shaping up to be a bit of a year of the woman even before the Kavanaugh nomination. There are a record number of women running for office this year, something like 1/3 of the candidates across all the races in California. 1/3 of the candidates this November are women. And while that's nowhere near the numbers that women make up in society, it's more than we've seen on the ballot in 20 years. So, it was already kind of shaping up in that direction. I do think that the Kavanaugh nomination process was extremely motivating for a lot of women, and so I think it's an example of kind of how your vote really plays out. You saw women kind of making an impact on Senator Jeff Flake face to face, in terms of the decision to delay the vote on his nomination, and you saw the impact that one swing vote can have in the Senate. So those things really do show the you can't win if you don't play. And so they do kind of give, I think, an energizing feel for the importance of being involved.
I will go back to that poll, if I can, really quickly, Mark, for one more number. Prior to the whole biggest part of the Kavanaugh fight, that poll of Californians, 74% of likely voters said that the Supreme Court decision was important to them this year. I bet that number could go even higher after what we saw with the Kavanaugh situation. You've got to think there's an impact on election day.
Voters are paying attention. Well, John, what about the economy? It seems doing pretty well, fairly robust, but it doesn't seem to be benefiting Republican candidates. Why is that?
Depends on who you talk to. I mean, the question is, do you hear Republican candidates talking about the economy? I mean, look at those battleground House races. When you look at them, a lot of the conversation is about Trump. A lot of the conversation is about illegal immigration. It's not about jobs in the economy and the impact of the tax cuts. And so we've all heard, now for 25 years since the Bill Clinton campaign said it's the economy stupid, except that it wasn't this time. It's immigration stupid, or it's Trump view, or it's something else.
Trump seems to drown out all the other messages.
There's a lot of noise,
Yeah, what do you think?
Oh, I just think, positive news is a little bit taking a back seat right now, So yes, things are humming along well in terms of the big picture of the economy. But there's a lot of drama coming out of Washington, and it's very hard for any political campaign, try as they might, to kind of ignore that.
You know, it's going to be interesting. Voter turnout's always an interesting issue. And typically, Latinos don't vote in the numbers that probably would suggest that they would. Young people, women. Are we going to see a big change in voter turnout, you think, in this election?
You know, the turnout in the primary this year was much higher than last time around. So if that holds, then yes, we will see high turnout. Now, high turnout in California is a relative term because we generally don't have good turnout. But I do expect that it would be, you know, I don't know, between 50 and 60% this time.
It'll be a key indicator of kind of what's going on here. I mean, it was better than the last election, but the last elections were, especially the last 2014, was the worst in California history. So it really had very few places to go but up. But we have been waiting for a very long time, to your part, Mark, for voters of color, younger voters, to show up with the same enthusiasm they had there. Look at the 2016 race. They were enthused about Bernie Sanders, for example. Bernie Sanders didn't win California, so you can't win unless you show up to vote. Registration is one thing, casting the ballot is the thing.
Okay, well, up next we're going to talk about the state races, the governor, the state legislature, and those often overlooked constitutional offices. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking about this November's races with John Myers of the LA Times and Laurel Rosenhall with CalMatters. So, John, what state issues do you think are going to be motivating voters as they're thinking about the next governor or the next legislator?
Well, it's interesting. You said state issues because I was going to say all these things that are national issues until you said that, because I do think it's a nationalized election in a lot of ways. Having said that, you look at the polling, I think illegal immigration is still up there. I think it has been put on the table nationally. It's being talked about in the state. I will be curious to see if people talk, at least on state races, about housing, about homelessness, about transportation woes, and that's outside of the gas tax debate of Prop 6, because those are the things that impact life in California. Jobs and the economy important, but housing is that thing that we've spent the last couple of years in Sacramento talking about. Do we hear about it on the campaign trail?
What do you think, Laurel?
I just think as far as for voters, you know, the cost of living in California is paramount. It's, you know, if you're doing well and you own a business, you're worried about sort of the tremendous cost of running a business and attracting and retaining your workers. If you are a worker, you're worried about the basics, you know, paying the rent, paying the bills. So I think the cost of living is a big deal. And I think, you know, we've seen on the campaign trail, certainly John Cox, the Republican candidate for governor, is trying to make that a marquee issue. And Gavin Newsom, in his own way, is doing the same thing, sort of with a different spin on it. But he's, you know, saying that, yeah, our economic inequality, the cost of living here, it's really hard.
Well, the expectation is, frankly, that Gavin Newsom is in the lead. All the polls show that. So what is going to be the fate of Governor Brown's big legacy projects, the high-speed rail, the Twin Tunnels project, if Newsom wins?
You know, I asked him that question last year at the State of the State, Jerry Brown's
last
State of the State, and he said he was going to be continuing the vision if he had the
except one tunnel, half the vision, one tunnel instead of two.
So he said one tunnel instead of two, but you know, and he's flip-flopped on high-speed rail. But his, you know, current kind of position is he would be continuing Brown's vision on both of those things. I think overall, you know, for Gavin Newsom, if he becomes the governor, the challenge is going to be how much does he work on sort of continuing Brown's legacy versus how much does he work on differentiating himself and establishing his own legacy. And I think it's going to be a difficult line to walk, and one that we will see him trying to kind of straddle over the course of his governorship.
If he's like any governor, he has to come in and put his brand, his stamp on something, and maybe he wants to take a second look at those projects and look at the fine points of the tunnel project or high-speed rail. He certainly talked about accountability on high-speed rail a little bit. He can't say, I'm going to do something completely different, because that would be something we would write about, right? So he's going to say, you know, I believe in them, but I think he should take a look at them, and he probably will.
You're seeing the polling showing that actually the Republican John Cox is kind of narrowing the gap with Gavin Newsom enough to win.
Enough to win. Again, I go back to my Donald Trump job performance number, which was about 37% in a poll. There was a poll at one point in the governor's race, now a few weeks ago, 39% for John Cox. He was basically getting the Trump vote. He doesn't have the money that Newsom has. He is playing in a state where Republicans are vastly outnumbered. They are fewer than 1 in 4 registered voters at this point. It's an uphill battle. Never say never in politics. You don't know what the very end is going to be, but it's hard to see a path forward unless there's an unforced error from Newsom. Okay,
so let me ask you about some of the down-ticket races, Laurel. People don't really pay attention to. Any ones that kind of you're looking at that these are kind of interesting?
I mean, the state superintendent of schools is going to be a very fascinating, high energy, big money race. It's considered a nonpartisan race, but really what you have here are two Democrats with very different visions about public education. And this is one of the issues.
What's the critical issue there? What are they disagreeing
charter
about?
schools and sort of employment conditions for teachers are enormous. And, you know, Marshall Tuck is the candidate who's backed by the charter school and the world that kind of calls themselves the school reform world, education reform. Tony Thurmond is an assemblyman who is backed by the teachers union and the more sort of establishment of the education world. And education is one of the few issues that really divides Democrats. And so this race kind of exemplifies that larger schism within the Democratic Party.
Lieutenant governor, not because the lieutenant governor has anything to do,
Governor
but
light.
because it's you know, you get up in the morning, see if the governor's okay, go back to bed, right? But because I think both of these candidates have their eyes set on some other office. Eleni Kounalakis and Ed Hernandez, both Democrats. I think they both think they could see themselves in a race beyond this. Kounalakis, of course, has not served in California, was an ambassador, her big coming out. And insurance commissioner, Steve Poizner, who shed his Republican label to become a no-party preference candidate to come back to the insurance
Which is very
commissioner.
interesting. Is he setting a new strategy for Republicans?
Well, against Ricardo Lara, a Democrat, well-known Democrat from the state Senate. Whether Poizner is really a different guy depends on who you talk to. I've talked to him. I didn't really see a big change other than some immigration issues. I think some people see this as a test of being a no-party preference candidate. I think this is a Steve Poizner. Does he come back and rehabilitate his issue after a blistering gubernatorial race in 2010?
We're really out of time, but I want to ask you a quick question, John, about the state legislature. Are we going to see the Democrats retake a supermajority in the Senate?
I think it's going to be hard. There's like one or two races we're watching. I think it's a toss-up.
What do you think?
I think they'll get it in the Assembly, and I think the Senate is more the question.
Okay. Well, up next, we're going to talk about the U.S. Senate race with Dianne Feinstein. Is her approach of bipartisan, agreeing, working with folks, still work in the age of Trump? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein was first elected U.S. Senator in California in 1992, 26 years ago. Some would say in very different times. Can this experienced bipartisan deal-maker fit in the age of Trump? We're talking to Laurel Rosenhall from CalMatters and John Myers of the LA Times. So, John, Senator Feinstein's challenger, State Senator Kevin DeLeon, has indicated that Senator Feinstein's really out of touch with today's California voters. She's just too moderate. What do you think?
I think it mirrors the fight in the Democratic Party. It mirrors, and frankly, it mirrors the fight in politics now about ultra-liberal, ultra-conservative, who can be pragmatic. Is there a value? Is there a reward in being pragmatic? It's fascinating, isn't it, that Dianne Feinstein came into office in the U.S. Senate in the aftermath of the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearings, right? And here we are in the aftermath of the Brett Kavanaugh, Christine Blasey Ford hearings. It's just, I think it really depends on who votes. And it really depends on whether people see Feinstein as as getting somewhere, or do they want to make a broader statement? DeLeon's had an uphill battle this whole time. I think it still is an uphill battle.
It closed the gap, but there's still a gap there.
Well, he got his party's endorsement, which was an enormous coup to, get the endorsement over the incumbent. He has endorsements from some powerful labor groups. But
he doesn't have their money.
He doesn't have the money.
But his background's in labor, too.
Yes, and even, he has the support of Tom Steyer, who has billions of dollars, but doesn't seem to be spending them to help him.
Hasn't given it to him, right.
So, I think that he has a very powerful, but perhaps in the end, symbolic run.
Yeah, he's a guy, and I just have to say really quickly, Kevin DeLeon, who's been in Sacramento for a very long time, author of landmark legislation on climate change, on immigration, but is not known. And you've got to
effective leader of the Senate.
Right, but you've got to have money when your name ID is not out there in this state, and the money just hasn't been there.
As I recall, he lost in his very own district. I mean, he lost for this race in his own Los Angeles district.
Well, what do you think, Laurel, in terms of the Kavanaugh matter, the Me Too movement? Is that going to help or hurt Dianne Feinstein?
Well, I think it helps her among Democrats. It hurts her among Republicans, but Republicans don't like her anyway. Republicans are going to probably mostly sit out this race anyway. They're going to skip it on their ballot. I think for Democrats, it shows that, having a senator with a lot of seniority puts you sort of in the center of the action.
Let me ask you this, John, she's had some hawkish views on immigration, certainly in the 1990s. She's evolved from that. But Dan Walters, another person that's been on our program several times, has suggested this might cut into her lead among the anti-Trump, pro-immigrant Democrats. Do you agree?
It might, but I think what Laurel said is right. Is that there are going to be a large number of people, I suspect, who skip this race, who either don't know enough, don't see enough of a difference on the issues, Republicans, independents, and so then it really comes down to the people who cast the vote on this, and are they going to punish her for that? I have a hard time seeing that it actually comes to fruition. I do think with a different race, with a candidate who's well-funded and a different message, Feinstein would be feeling the heat more than she's feeling it now. She seems to be, we've said at the beginning here, someone who speaks to a politics that has not, that has moved away in some ways, about pragmatism and centrist, and this race could have been a lot different if De Leon had the momentum.
Well, here's a tough issue, Laura. I'm going to throw it at you. Senator Feinstein is going to be 85. Is 85, oldest member of the U.S. Senate. If reelected, she'll be 90 at the end of her next term. Appears to be in good health. Other senators have been in the U.S. Senate into their 90s. Will this be an issue? Should it be an issue?
It may be an issue for some voters, but I don't think it'll be an issue for enough voters that it's the deciding factor.
Don't think so. I'm thinking Alan Cranston. For some reason, I'm thinking there's similarities here. One of the things that was being discussed when he was running was maybe he's too old, et cetera. Is that an issue in this race?
People talked about it at the beginning. They talked about it quietly because they realized this was a very difficult thing to talk about, and there's a backlash to talking about it.
Well, they use code words like a new generation or new leadership.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the polling has been pretty consistent that Feinstein she has not lost or gained a lot of ground. De Leon has gained a little bit of ground. I still think it's her race to lose. I don't think that's going to come up.
Yeah, she's an icon in California politics, that's for sure. Well, up next, the congressional races in California. They could flip the House to the Democrats. Is that possible or even probable? That conversation in a moment. This is Mark Kepler with the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. For the Democrats to win back the House, they're going to need to win some seats in California currently held by Republicans. What are the chances that will happen, and what does it mean for California if it does happen? We're talking to John Myers of the LA Times and Laurel Rosenhall with CalMatters. So, John, how many races in California, congressional races, are really competitive?
Depending on how you define it, somewhere between 6 and 8. And really, you look at these Republican seats where Hillary Clinton won for president in 2016. So you've got them, and they're really clustered around Southern California with some in the Central Valley. Of course, you've got those in Orange County. You've got the Central Valley, David Valadao, Jeff Denham. That's where Democrats have put their money in this. They believe that their momentum is on their side. I don't think they can win all of them, but if they can win half of them or something like that, that is a major road toward taking back the House.
What do you think, Laurel? Agree, 6 to 8 is what we're really talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, some people might go as high as 10,
Sure.
depending if you include like the McClintock district in northern Sierras or not. But I mean, yeah.
It seems like a good number. I've seen that number as well. I just wanted to double check, and so you verified that. Laura, let me ask you this. It seems like the congressional Republican strategy in California is just kind of to forget Trump and to paint congressional Democrats as just kind of tax happy, spending politicians. And they've seized on Prop 6, which is the repeal of the gas tax, and hoping that's going to kind of energize their base. But that's a state issue, not a federal issue. Is that strategy, you think, going to succeed? Will it overcome the Trump effect?
I think it may work in some districts. It may motivate Republicans in some districts. I don't know that it kind of sweeps the state as this strong force, particularly because that campaign for Prop 6, they're lagging in money and they're going up against some very well-funded interests that oppose the thing. But fundamentally, like so many things in politics, this is going to come down to turnout. Who comes out to vote? That is going to be that's going to be the deciding factor.
And we talked. The very first question in this program was about what effect is Trump going to have, and you say he can have a really big effect.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating that when you look at some of these congressional races, in the cycles before these, and I'm thinking mainly 2012, 2014, 2016, they were so nationalized, and those Republicans were running about Obamacare is horrible, and all of these, and now, to that point about the gas tax, we're trying to pivot it some way and get away. Don't look at the national show in a way. Let's talk about, these horrible tax projects in California. It's a fascinating pivot in part because of Trump. They can't distance themselves, these Republican incumbents, completely, because that would get them in trouble in Washington, but they can't embrace the guy completely. It's a really tough place to be.
So Trump, as a general rule, in these moderate swing districts, is going to be a bit of an anchor for Republican candidates.
Could be, and I don't know that I call the districts moderate, but I'd say the electorates are really polarized here. And the question is, if you get turnout, if you get high Democratic turnout in some of these races, that's a real problem.
So, John, I'm going to ask you to kind of stick your neck out here a little bit, make an educated guess. How many seats do the Democrats win in California? How many do they take away from the Republican, if any?
It's easier for me to come up with a number than to tell you district by district, in which case I would be in trouble. I think a reasonable number is 3 or 4. I feel like that the hopes are always higher than they're really going to be. I can't tell you which ones those are, although I would say watch Southern California races more than the Valley races. The Valley races, you know well, you have not seen things pay off there in a way, so I'd say maybe 3 or 4.
What do you think, Laurel?
I was going to say about 2 or 3. So
we're close.
We're close. Okay.
But similarly, Orange County, Northern San Diego County, that seems to be the real swingy area.
Right. So let me ask you this, Laurel. If the Democrats do win control of the House of Representatives, what does that mean for California?
I think it means that there's going to be a lot more pressure on the House on the issue of impeachment. I mean, I think you're going to have a lot of Californians who are going to be really pressuring their members of Congress on impeachment.
I think you're going to have some of the most liberal members of the California delegation are going to be in the spotlight, and maybe not in the best way, because the national narrative about whether an impeachment vote helps Democrats in 2020 is very different than California. Look at Barbara Lee in the Bay Area. Look at Maxine Waters in Los Angeles. These are people who are going to be very vocal probably about impeachment, and they may not do exactly what Nancy Pelosi, if she is the speaker, would want in terms of that positioning for 2020. I think Californians are going to be in the spotlight no matter what.
Well, is California going to be hurt in some ways because, Kevin McCarthy, it looks like he's in line possibly to be the next head of the House, good relationship with Trump. All of a sudden, he's now in the minority. Does that hurt California?
I don't know. I mean, how's the McCarthy relationship with Trump worked out for
just
California
gonna
so
say,
far? I haven't really seen any demonstrable impact.
Other than, the disaster aid that California has gotten very quickly from the Trump administration. That may or may not have something to do with Kevin McCarthy, I don't know. You can't really say that McCarthy is sending home tons of pork for the entire state of California. So
I guess it remains to be seen.
But I will say, a safe prediction, a Californian is poised to be the next Speaker of the House.
Well, there you go. That's a very
Nancy
safe
Pelosi,
prediction.
Kevin McCarthy.
That's right. Thank you, John Mars, of Late Times, and Laurel Rosenhall with CalMatters for joining us. Now it's your turn to exercise your democratic right and vote. This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.